Hello there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. They say you should never meet your heroes because if they are your heroes, that means you've probably built up quite an unrealistic image and expectations of who they are as people. This is doubly true for actors and actresses who portray your favorite characters on screen. I remember on multiple occasions becoming infatuated with a character and then just being disappointed when I saw the actor or actress who portrayed that character gave an interview because they have a different accent or maybe their personalities are just very different from the characters they portray, which is obvious, right? This is a testament to their acting abilities, but nonetheless it is disappointing. So in today's video, what I want to focus on are actually actors and actresses who are quite similar to the characters they portray on screen in the Star Wars universe. Han Solo is by far my favorite character in the original trilogy, and a lot of it is because of the charisma and natural confidence of Harrison Ford. Mark and Carrie are iconic, but there's just something raw about how Harrison Ford appears on screen. It's like he's not acting, he's just being himself, a gruff and somewhat cynical everyman who's thrown into a chaotic drama of galactic proportions. Hollywood. Like Han Solo, Ford had to work for everything in his life. Luke was just a bored kid looking for adventure when he joined the rebellion, and Leia was born into it with a silver spoon and all. She was rebel royalty, but Han was a street urchin, and so he had to be pragmatic. He was a self-made man who smuggled goods and was just trying to eke out a living in a crazy galaxy. In the same way, Harrison Ford came from pretty humble acting beginnings. He wasn't a nepo baby. He wasn't some starry-eyed kid coming to California looking for a role of a lifetime. He was a lot more realistic than that. Harrison Ford was a middle-aged man. Back then when you were in your 30s, that was middle age. And Harrison Ford had a family and kids, and so he couldn't just go around chasing jobs for money. And so he mostly earned a living as a carpenter. And just like how Han Solo accidentally found himself in the rebellion because of his day job flying ships around, Harrison Ford got the role of a lifetime because he was doing carpentry for casting director Fred Bruce, and George Lucas just happened to walk in. George originally hired Harrison Ford to read lines, but then realized that Harrison Ford had the natural charisma that was perfect for the role of Han Solo. And Harrison Ford really did add a lot to the character. I think a lot of Han Solo's best lines are all improvised by him. George Lucas is famous for being terrible at dialogue and writing cheesy lines, and Harrison Ford didn't want any of that. And so some of Han Solo's most iconic lines were made up by him.
I love you.
I know.
The original line for Han Solo was "I love you too," which is kind of just a throwaway line, right? I mean, it doesn't really add anything or make that moment special. Then there's Han Solo's reluctance to join the rebellion or any political cause. He is clearly an anti-establishment character, and Harrison Ford really gives off that same vibe. He shuns fame, he shuns the glamour of Hollywood, he oftentimes ridicules fame and Hollywood actors, and he also famously wanted Han Solo to be killed off at the end of the original trilogy. At his core, Harrison Ford, like Han Solo, does not come off as a very polished individual. He's not media trained, he says what's on his mind, and I think that's why people like him. And lastly, like Han Solo, Harrison Ford is a pilot, and a pretty good one at that. In 2015, when a single-engine prop plane lost power after takeoff, Harrison Ford managed to crash land in a golf course, avoiding killing himself and also avoiding killing people in a densely populated urban center. He's also a helicopter pilot, which is no easy feat, and he volunteers his time for search and rescue missions. He's saved hikers, lost Boy Scouts, all sorts of good stuff like that. Maybe Harrison Ford goes out of his way to seek heroics, or maybe he's just Han Solo. Now, Harrison Ford is a badass, that much is clear. But Sir Christopher Lee is a badass amongst badasses. There are levels to this, In Star Wars, Christopher Lee plays the villainous Count Dooku, a well-meaning and talented Jedi who ultimately turned to the dark side after seeing the failures of the Jedi Order. He was known as an excellent statesman, duelist, and one of the most dangerous men alive in the galaxy. In real life, Christopher Lee had an acting career that spanned 6 decades, and he portrayed some of the most iconic villains in movie history. From Saruman in the Lord of the Rings trilogy to Francisco Scaramanga in The Man with the Golden Gun. He's also played another Count, Count Dracula, and was a frequent collaborator with Tim Burton. But Christopher Lee isn't just an actor, he's had many careers and occupations where he's picked up skills and knowledge that probably really helped him portray villains so well on screen. For instance, when Wormtongue betrays Saruman and stabs him in the back, Peter Jackson originally wanted Saruman to scream in pain, but Christopher Lee had another idea.
Have you any idea of what kind of noise happens when somebody's stabbed in the back? And I said, well, because I do.
Oh, yeah. It's not. Ah!
It's because the breath's driven out of your body.
How would Christopher Lee know all of this? Well, in 1939, as the world fell apart, as Lesserman cowered in fear, Christopher Lee plunged straight into the fight, and what a crazy military career he had. First, this man volunteered to fight for the Finnish army against the Soviet Union during the very brutal Winter War. Now, British volunteers were kept far away from the front, and Christopher Lee admits that he didn't really know how to ski, and, had he been deployed to the front, he probably would not have survived for very long. Now, Christopher Lee would return to the UK and he would serve in the Home Guard for a while before trying to join up with the Royal Air Force in 1941. But unfortunately, due to a medical issue with his eye, he wasn't allowed to continue fighting. But that does not deter Christopher Lee. No, he ends up joining the RAF Intelligence Corps and he serves as a liaison officer. And he would fight in the African theater where he almost died when the runway he was attached to gets blown up. He also partook in the Italian theater where he was attached with an army unit. He actually fought alongside Gurkhas at the bloody Battle of Monte Cassino in an officer exchange program with the army. He even climbed up Mount Vesuvius, or was it Mount Doom, while on leave in Naples a few days before it erupted. Now, as the war ended, Christopher Lee, fluent in French, Italian, and German, was recruited to hunt down Nazi war criminals. Christopher Lee would leave the military after 1946, and just like Dooku, he would embrace his aristocratic familial roots. Lee's maternal ancestors were given the right to bear a coat of arms by the Holy Roman Emperor. And in the 1950s, Christopher Lee was engaged with Countess Henrietta Ewa Agnes von Rosen, a Swedish aristocrat slash stunt performer and bullfighter. That's quite a couple. Now, Count Dooku, Christopher Lee, had to ask the Swedish king for permission to marry her, but ultimately called off the wedding because apparently he didn't want to subject Agnes to the impoverished life of an actor. Later on in his life, Christopher Lee would start a music career as a heavy metal singer, and has quite an operatic and deep voice, as you hear during his portrayal of Count Dooku. And lastly, it's said that Christopher Lee has dabbled in the dark side, just like Count Dooku. It's rumored that he has a library of 20,000 satanic books, something that Christopher Lee has denied. Actually, he's warned people to stay away from black magic on numerous occasions because, quote, "You will not only lose your mind, you'll lose your soul." Christopher Lee passed away at 93 years of age because of heart failure. He did, however, experience the 20th century and a little bit of the 21st century in all of its glory and horror. Very few people have lived a life as full as Sir Christopher Lee. He's a complete inspiration. Padme Amidala was considered somewhat of a childhood prodigy when she was elected to become the monarch of Naboo at the age of 14. Her young ascension to the throne was unprecedented in her planet's history, and despite her youth, Padme Amidala was a very serious and professional ruler. She exhibited courage and maturity one would expect from a much older politician. She never bent under the pressure of the Trade Federation blockade, and never thought even for once of abandoning her people. In real life, Natalie Portman was a very impressive child as well. She was oftentimes described as far more serious and motivated than her peers. At 10, she was spotted by a Revlon agent, that's a company for cosmetics and perfumes. Natalie turned down the offer to become a model, but used that opportunity to land herself an acting agent, because that's what she wanted to do. In 1992, at the age of just 11, she auditioned for an off-Broadway play called Ruthless and became an understudy for the star of the show. One of the other understudies in the show is actually Britney Spears. Shortly after, Natalie Portman would secure her first leading role in Leon the Professional, an excellent and definitely controversial film in which Portman plays an orphan child who befriends a middle-aged hitman. She was just 12 at the time, and it was a breakout role, but unfortunately her character was sexualized quite a lot in that movie, and that actually led to another role in a movie called Beautiful Girls. She plays a teenager who's kind of in love with a much older neighbor. She's also cast as the opposite to Leonardo DiCaprio in Romeo and Juliet. Back then, Leo was still into young girls, but it was more appropriate because he was also a teenager. But luckily, some studio executives found her too young for the role, rare win for Hollywood studio execs. Now, Natalie Portman would later on reflect that being sexualized at such a young age really deterred her from taking certain roles, and it's very sad that she had to go through that. Yes, fame is great, and getting all that money is great, but should a child ever be subjected to that kind of stuff? I guess you could say that these early setbacks, or at least just the creepiness of Hollywood, was Natalie Portman's first major trial in life. Just like how Padme had to deal with so much turmoil as her planet was invaded by the Trade Federation at such a young age. But just like Padme, Natalie would prevail. She would secure her role in Star Wars in 1997 with the prequel trilogy, and that would launch her into stardom. And despite mixed critical reviews and fan criticism that destroyed her on-screen partner Hayden Christensen's career, Natalie Portman would endure and continue on on to have an extraordinary acting career. It should be noted that while she was performing in Star Wars, she was still going to high school and basically living a relatively normal life as a student, and she was an excellent student. During that time, she entered a paper into the Intel Science Talent Search titled A Simple Method to Demonstrate the Enzymatic Production of Hydrogen from Sugar, which strangely ties in directly to our character of Padme, who as Queen of Naboo oversaw the exploitation of clean plasma energy from her planet. And in between episode 1 and episode 2, well, Padme went to Harvard to study psychology. I think other stars in the prime of their career probably wouldn't have pursued an education when money and roles were coming in so rapidly. But Natalie Portman was famously quoted for saying, "I would rather be smart than a movie star." I think it's extremely impressive for a young celebrity to make this choice. It just shows us how much confidence she had in herself and what a level head she had on her shoulders. Which is exactly what I think of when I think of Padme Amidala. Natalie Portman would go on to win an Academy Award for Best Actress for her performance in The Black Swan. Again, another terrific Star Wars alum who stopped at nothing to reach her goals. Truly an inspirational woman. Bill Burr's addition to Star Wars and The Mandalorian was definitely unexpected. And while Bill Burr's character Migs Mayfield is an Imperial soldier, and as far as I know, Bill never served in the military, Mayfield's mannerisms, which include just mocking everyone he sees, from Mando to the New Republic security officers' loafers, is 100% Bill Burr, as are Mayfield's views about establishment politics and joining causes like the Empire. The frustration, the sarcasm, the disillusionment, and just underlying depression we see from Mayfield is clearly coming from Bill Burr. And of course, Migs Mayfield, like any good comic worth his salt, will call out hypocrisy no matter where he sees it, even if it's his former commander surrounded by a bunch of loyal Imperial troopers. Bill Burr, Migs Mayfield, realizes that there are some things more important than physical safety, and that is the truth. And just like Migs, beneath that tough exterior, Bill Burr is a relatively broken individual who hides his pain and vulnerability and surprising depth through comedy and a flippant personality. Alex Ferns portrays the no-nonsense tactical blueberry known as Sergeant Linus Mosk, the over-eager security officer seen in the first arc of the Andor TV series, and it seems like there's some crossover between the character and the actor. Born in Scotland, Alex Ferns' family moved to South Africa when he was around 11 years old because his father, an electrician, got a job on a large power plant construction site. Ferns would spend the rest of his childhood in South Africa under the apartheid regime. Even though he was a foreign national, Ferns was conscripted into the South African Defense Force after the national defense laws were changed to include these individuals in service. If Ferns didn't serve, he probably would have been imprisoned or deported or both. Ferns would go on to serve in the South African Defense Force as a gunner and was generally beloved by the men around him. He was specifically known for excelling in PT and often sung while in drills in order to lift the morale of the men. Alex Ferns would fight in the border wars between South Africa and neighboring Angola from 1987 to 1989. It's very clear those experiences helped him portray Sergeant Linus Mosk with perfection on screen. When people in my generation talk about Obi-Wan Kenobi, they're usually thinking about Ewan McGregor, not Alec Guinness. Ewan brings a lightness and warmth to the character that I think really makes Obi-Wan a far richer and more likable character. At the same time, Ewan's professionalism and dedication to the role is also very Kenobi-like. The sheer amount of time Ewan and Hayden Christensen spent doing the choreography for the lightsaber duels in the prequels is a great example of his Jedi-like dedication to the forms. In particular, the most famous duel between Anakin and Obi-Wan was done primarily by the actors with very little usage of stunt doubles. They prepared for months to do this. That duel still remains one of the most complex sequences of swordplay in modern cinema and still holds up today. But what really makes Ewan McGregor so similar to Obi-Wan Kenobi is the fact that after the prequels were finished, Ewan, overwhelmed by the demand the job had on his life, took off on a motorcycle trip with an old friend and traveled the long way around the world. It's not quite exile in the deserts of Tatooine, but when you spend that long on the saddle, it's definitely a spiritual moment where one learns quite a lot about themselves. Actually, Ewan McGregor's motorcycle adventures had a huge impact on my life, and some of the finest moments in my younger days were on the saddle with friends like my editor Congo. Sure, we almost died on numerous occasions while exploring the world, but sometimes a close brush with death makes you want to live an even more meaningful and vibrant life. Thank you, Obi-Wan Kenobi. I do appreciate it, and that is why I always end my videos with a declaration for my love of the Republic and democracy. I'll see you guys next time.